Okay, so let's dive into some serious history here.
Mm.
You wanted to unpack the Balfour Declaration and Trump's proposal for Gaza, and we're going to be spanning over a century,
Yeah.
from World War I intrigue to modern-day controversy.
It's interesting, right? Because the Balfour Declaration is one of those historical events that just continues to have a major impact. It's a document from 1917,
Wow.
but its effects are still rippling through the Middle East today.
Absolutely. And, let's go back to that time, 1917. Europe is in the middle of World War I.
Right.
And Britain makes a move to promise support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Yeah.
And this seemingly simple statement is the Balfour Declaration, but it opened up this Pandora's box of issues that still shape the Middle East.
I think what's crucial to understand is that the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, they weren't really part of this decision. Britain was operating in a very different world.
Yeah.
One where colonial powers made decisions about territories without much regard for the people who were already living there.
So why would Britain do this? What was in it for them?
Well, it was partly strategic. Palestine was close to the Suez Canal, a very vital trade route.
Right.
And Britain saw value in having a presence there. I think there's also the aspect of garnering Jewish support for the war effort, particularly in the United States. And I think this reveals how the Balfour Declaration was less about altruism and more about securing British strategic interests, and really sets a precedent for future interventions in the region.
So they were playing a long game with global implications.
Absolutely. The Balfour Declaration had a direct impact on the trajectory of the Middle East. After the war, Britain gained control of Palestine under a League of Nations mandate,
Okay.
which essentially meant they were tasked with governing Palestine until it was ready for independence.
So Britain is in charge. What happens next?
Well, we start to see increased Jewish immigration to Palestine under British rule. Now, this wasn't all bad. It led to economic development and modernization, but it also led to the displacement of the Arab population, creating resentment and tension.
So you're trying to squeeze two very different visions for the future into the same space.
Exactly. And both the Zionist movement aiming for a Jewish state and the Palestinian nationalist movement advocating for Arab self-determination, they both gain momentum during this period, and the situation becomes increasingly volatile.
So this is building up to the conflict we see today.
In a way, yes. The situation kind of boils over in 1947 when the UN proposes a partition plan to create independent Arab and Jewish states in Palestine. However, this plan was met with resistance from both sides and ultimately failed. The internal divisions within both the Arab and Jewish communities, coupled with the lack of trust in the international community, I think that played a significant role in the plan's failure.
And that leads to the 1948 war and the establishment of Israel.
Correct. The 1948 war resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, further deepening the conflict and leaving lasting scars on the region.
So we can really see how the Balfour Declaration, even though it was made decades earlier, had this ripple effect that continues to shape the landscape of the Middle East.
And bridging the gap between history and the present, we see echoes of the Balfour Declaration's top-down approach in a very controversial proposal made by U.S. President Donald Trump in 2025.
Okay.
He proposed taking over the Gaza Strip, envisioning its transformation into a Riviera of the Middle East.
Wow. That sounds like a dramatic shift. What did that actually entail?
The catch was that his vision involved relocating the Palestinian residents of Gaza.
Oh, wow.
We're talking about potentially relocating roughly 2 million people.
Yeah.
A massive undertaking with significant ethical and logistical challenges.
It seems like relocating Palestinians would just shift the conflict elsewhere. How does that contribute to a lasting peace?
That's a really crucial question. Many critics argue that Trump's proposal ignores the historical context and the root causes of the conflict. It also raises serious concerns about the violation of human rights and international law. And so the international community, including many of America's allies, condemned the proposal, calling it unrealistic and potentially destabilizing.
So even though it was presented as a solution, it actually created more problems.
It did. Trump's proposal was seen by many as an attempt to impose a solution without addressing the underlying issues of Palestinian self-determination and the right of return for refugees.
So this is all painting a pretty complex picture. It seems like every action taken in this region has far-reaching consequences.
And it's important to remember that behind these geopolitical maneuvers, there are real people whose lives are directly impacted by these decisions.
Absolutely.
So let's shift our focus now to the Gaza Strip itself and try to understand what life is like for the people who call it home.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the big picture of politics and history, but we can't forget about the human side of this story.
Absolutely. Imagine living in an area roughly twice the size of Manhattan, but with a population of over 2 million people.
Wow, that's an incredible population density.
It is. And it's compounded by a decade-long blockade, repeated conflicts and infrastructure that just struggling to keep up. These are the realities in Gaza.
So the situation sounds incredibly challenging.
It is. And into this already complex situation comes Trump's proposal, essentially suggesting a mass relocation of the Palestinian population.
Right.
It's hard to overstate the impact such a proposal would have on the people living there.
Yeah, it must have been met with a lot of mixed emotions.
We reached out to residents in Gaza to hear their perspectives firsthand, and their responses were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Many expressed a deep connection to their land and a sense of injustice at the thought of being forced to leave.
So could you share some of those voices with us?
Sure. One resident said, and I quote, "My family has lived in Gaza for generations. This is our home, our land. To be told we must leave, it feels like another chapter in a long history of displacement."
That really highlights the sense of rootedness, the connection to the land that goes back centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. Another resident pointed out the difficult conditions, particularly for young people, saying, "Unemployment is high, opportunities are limited, but leaving, that's not a solution. It's just another form of dispossession."
Yeah, it raises a crucial question. What does a solution look like when people are so deeply connected to their land, even amidst hardship?
And many residents expressed a desire for peace and a better future for their children. But they emphasize that this future needs to be built in Gaza, not somewhere else decided by someone else. They want agency and self-determination.
It's a really powerful message.
It is. These voices from Gaza drive home a critical point. Any solution, any proposal has to center the voices and aspirations of the people who live there. It can't just be about what outside powers deem best or what looks good on paper. The human cost, the emotional toll has to be factored into the equation.
Right. It's not just about finding a political solution. It's about ensuring that the solution respects the dignity and rights of the people involved.
Exactly. And that's where the perspectives of humanitarian organizations and aid workers become so important. They're working on the ground in Gaza, witnessing the daily struggles and resilience of the people.
So what insights have they shared about the situation?
Well, they paint a stark picture of the challenges. The psychological impact of living under constant threat, the strain on families, the lack of access to basic necessities. But they also highlight the incredible spirit of the people, their determination to create a better future for their children.
It sounds like a very complex and nuanced situation. It's not just about finding a political solution. It's about addressing the very real human needs of the people living there.
Absolutely. And they emphasize that a lasting solution requires more than just economic development or relocation plans. It demands addressing the root causes of the conflict, the political and historical grievances that have fueled decades of tension. It requires listening to the people of Gaza, not dictating solutions from afar.
So where do we go from here? What are the potential paths forward? What can we learn from the echoes of history? From the Balfour Declaration to Trump's proposal to inform a better approach.
That's a critical question, and one that we'll be exploring in our final segment.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
Yeah.
From the origins of the Balfour Declaration to the realities of life in Gaza today.
Yay.
And we've seen how those historical decisions continue to have a profound impact on the present.
They do.
And how, these proposed solutions can sometimes create more problems than they solve.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really, really complex story.
It is. The story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a very complex one, with layers of historical grievances and political maneuvering and human suffering. But it's also a story of resilience and hope and a longing for peace.
So as we look ahead, is there a path forward that leads to a lasting peace in the Middle East?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Okay.
We have diplomats who've worked on negotiations, peace activists who've been building bridges on the ground, and scholars who've spent years studying the intricacies of this issue.
That's fantastic to have such a diverse range of perspectives. So what have we learned from the past? What lessons can we apply to the present and the future?
Well, I think one of the most crucial takeaways from both the Balfour Declaration and Trump's proposal is the importance of inclusivity. You can't impose solutions from the outside without considering the voices and aspirations of those who are most affected.
It seems like both of those approaches failed to really listen to the Palestinian people.
Exactly. Whether it's the Palestinian people in 1917 or the residents of Gaza today, their perspectives, their rights, their dreams have to be at the heart of any viable solution.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. You might force something together, but it won't be complete, and it certainly won't last.
So inclusivity is key. What else should we keep in mind as we think about potential solutions?
Well, we also need to be very wary of those short-sighted solutions that prioritize immediate gains over long-term stability. The Balfour Declaration, while perhaps well-intentioned at the time, ultimately set the stage for decades of conflict
Right.
by failing to adequately address the needs and rights of the Palestinian population.
And it sounds like Trump's proposal, with its focus on economic development and relocation, risked repeating those same mistakes.
Yeah, many saw it as a Band-Aid solution that didn't address those underlying problems.
So if those are the pitfalls to avoid, what are the potential paths forward?
That's the big question. And there are no easy answers, but our experts have some insights based on their experience and research.
Okay, clear.
So one approach that has been discussed for decades is the two-state solution,
Right.
creating independent Israeli and Palestinian states living side by side in peace.
So that sounds good in theory, but what are the challenges in putting that into practice?
Well, there are major hurdles to overcome, such as the issues of border security, the status of Jerusalem, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees.
Those are some very complex and sensitive topics.
They are, absolutely. It's a complex web of interconnected challenges that require compromise and goodwill from all parties involved.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the issue of trust, which has been eroded by decades of conflict.
So it sounds like there needs to be a fundamental shift in the way that the two sides approach each other.
Absolutely. Another approach focuses on those grassroots peace-building initiatives.
Okay.
And these initiatives work on fostering dialogue and understanding between ordinary Israelis and Palestinians, building bridges from the bottom up, creating those connections that transcend political divides.
So that sounds promising.
Yeah.
It's about humanizing the other side and recognizing our shared humanity.
Exactly. These initiatives might seem small in scale, but they can have a ripple effect, changing hearts and minds one conversation at a time.
It's a good reminder that peace isn't just about treaties and agreements. It's about relationships and mutual respect. What about the role of the international community? Can they play a part in facilitating a lasting peace?
Absolutely. Global powers can play a really crucial role in supporting dialogue, providing economic assistance, and holding all sides accountable to international law and human rights standards. It's about creating an environment where peace can flourish not just through words, but through concrete actions.
So it sounds like there's no single solution, but a combination of approaches might be the most effective way forward.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It will require political will, creative diplomacy, and a commitment to dialogue and reconciliation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first, I think the past matters. The echoes of history, like the Balfour Declaration, can inform our understanding of the present and guide our actions for the future.
Right.
Second, there are no quick fixes. Lasting peace requires addressing the root causes of conflict, not just the symptoms.
Yeah.
Third, inclusivity is absolutely essential. Any solution must center the voices and aspirations of all those affected, especially the Palestinian people.
Right.
And finally, I think there is hope. While the challenges are immense, the human desire for peace is even greater.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles, the pursuit of peace is a worthy and necessary endeavor.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a very complex and often challenging topic.
Yes, thank you.
And we hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
We encourage you to continue exploring, keep learning, and stay engaged in the conversation about peace in the Middle East.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep believing in the possibility of a brighter future.